A nation once bound by alliance turns its sword against its former comrades. In the spring of 1915, Italy, long tied to the Central Powers by treaty, chose betrayal, or perhaps survival, and cast its lot with the Entente. Why? Because promises made in candlelit rooms outweighed loyalty inked in daylight. With the stroke of a diplomat's pen, Italy joined the First World War, not out of obligation, but ambition. The Austro-Hungarian frontier Alpine, forbidding and fortified, beckoned with dreams of territorial redemption. But what followed was not a triumphant campaign. It was a prolonged massacre. Over 2 years, Italy launched 12 massive assaults across the Isonzo River, each one a charge into mountainous slaughter. Each one led by a man whose name, Luigi Cadorna, would become synonymous not with victory, but with obstinacy, futility, and death. So why did Italy fight so hard and lose so much for land it barely held? Why did a modern European army march repeatedly into the jaws of well-defended cliffs? And what lessons still echo from the cries of the dead who fell beside that fast-running, swollen river? This is not a story of glory. This is a story of hubris, of attrition, and of one of the most senseless bloodbaths of the First World War. In the decades before the First World War, Italy found itself a late arrival to the game of empire. United only in the latter half of the 19th century, Italy looked north and east for expansion, and its eyes fell upon lands under Austro-Hungarian rule, especially those with ethnic Italians or deep historical ties to ancient Rome. By the dawn of the 20th century, Italy had joined the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary. But it was an uneasy friendship. Italy never fully trusted Vienna and coveted its Adriatic holdings, the Trentino, South Tyrol, Istria, and Dalmatia. Then came Sarajevo. In the summer of 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Bosnia. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Alliances activated. Europe spiraled into conflict. But Italy hesitated. The Triple Alliance was defensive by nature, and Italy claimed that Vienna, as the aggressor, had voided the terms. Rome declared neutrality and waited. For months, Italy remained on the sidelines, its leaders quietly gauging which side, Entente or Central Powers, could offer the better deal. It was Britain, France, and Russia who won the bidding war. In secret, they promised Italy not just protection and partnership, but reward. If Italy joined the war against Austria-Hungary, it would gain the long-coveted lands along the Adriatic. It was the lure of empire. On April 26, 1915, the Treaty of London was signed. By May, Italy declared war on Austria-Hungary. The enemy of yesterday had become the battlefield of tomorrow. Italy now faced a daunting foe across some of the harshest terrain in Europe, the Julian Alps, the Dolomites, and the winding, flood-prone Isonzo River. But none of this deterred General Luigi Cadorna. Appointed Chief of Staff in 1914, Cadorna was a rigid, cold, and deeply traditional commander. He believed in strict discipline, frontal assaults, and the absolute authority of command. Under his leadership, the Italian military would throw wave after wave of men against the entrenched Austrian lines, convinced that sheer will and numbers could break rock and steel. But what awaited them in the Isonzo Valley was a fortified Austrian frontier, high ground, well defended, and weather that was often deadlier than bullets. In late June 1915, the first battle of the Isonzo began. The Italian army, nearly double the size of the Austro-Hungarian forces in the region, launched an artillery barrage brief, uncoordinated, and ultimately ineffective. Then came the infantry. Up steep slopes they climbed, into machine gun fire, artillery shells, and barbed wire that sliced open the flesh of even the most determined soldier. By the end of the battle, Italy had lost over 15,000 men. Their gains? A few craggy footholds, some high ground near the town of Bovec, and blood-stained soil on the edge of the Kars Plateau. The Austrians had lost 10,000 but had held the line. Cadorna paused. Then he did it again. On July 18th, the Second Battle of the Isonzo began. The Second Battle of the Isonzo saw Italian numbers once again pitted against entrenched Austrian defenses. But this time, there was even less preparation. Critical supplies, especially artillery ammunition, were lacking. Communications between units were strained. And yet, Cadorna ordered the assault. Once more, the Italians charged. Brutal hand-to-hand combat erupted on the karst plateau, a barren stretch of limestone hills that offered no cover, no shade, no softness. The only thing that grew there was the casualty list. Yet, through grit and sheer attrition, Italian troops seized Mount Batognica, a vital position in the north, and captured Cappuccio Wood. Now they were menacing Gorizia, the Austro-Hungarian stronghold that had become both a symbol and a strategic key. By August 3rd, the offensive was called off. In exchange for modest territorial gains, 41,000 Italian soldiers were dead or wounded. The Austrians lost 46,000. The blood toll had doubled. And still, the high ground remained mostly in enemy hands. What drove Cadorna? Some say he was obsessed with breaking the Austrian line not through maneuver, but by grinding them down. Others argue it was politics. Italy's presence in the Entente was not without conditions. The Treaty of London had promised territorial rewards, but only in exchange for victory. Cadorna, perhaps, believed that measurable advances, however small, would keep the Allies convinced of Italy's value. But tactics that may have seemed acceptable in a Napoleonic campaign were suicidal in the age of machine guns. Still, Cadorna pressed forward. October 18, 1915, the Third Battle of the Isonzo. This time, Italy's artillery had improved. A longer, heavier barrage preceded the assault. Troops were issued new Adrian steel helmets. The army now had over 1,200 artillery pieces along the front. And yet, the pattern repeated. Cadorna attacked across a wide front, seeking to take Gorizia and outflank the Austrian positions. The key was Monte San Michele, a hill held by reinforced Austrian troops under Field Marshal Svetozar Borovich. These men had seen fighting on the Balkan front. They were battle-hardened. They knew the land. They had the high ground. The Italian assault faltered. Even as Cadorna attempted to shift strategy, massing troops in smaller focused thrusts, Borovich read the signs, redeployed, and repelled every attack. Another 67,000 Italians fell. The Austrians lost 41,000 more. Italy's army by now was beginning to fracture internally. Soldiers grew weary. Officers began questioning the logic of continuous frontal assaults. Morale declined. But Cadorna was unmoved. In November, he ordered the Fourth Battle of the Isonzo. More attacks, more deaths, little to show for it. The town of Gorizia still standing. The karst plateau still bleeding. Winter fell. Mud turned to frost. Men froze beside their rifles. And finally, there was calm. A deadly calm. Behind the lines, Cadorna prepared. He brought in 8 more divisions, dug deeper trenches, refitted artillery. On March 9, 1916, he struck again. The Fifth Battle of the Isonzo. And for the first time, a glimmer of strategic success. The Italians captured Mount Sabatino, a critical ridgeline overlooking Gorizia. It cost them 2,000 men, a number almost merciful by the standards of this campaign. The Austrians lost roughly the same. But the broader significance lay elsewhere. This offensive, timed with the Entente's plan to stretch German and Austrian forces, drew enemy troops away from Verdun and away from the Eastern Front. In this way, Italy's sacrifice became a tool of distraction. And the cost was once again paid in blood. The Austrians, feeling the pressure, began to pull units from the Isonzo front. The Eastern Front, especially in Galicia, demanded more attention, more men, more munitions. Cadorna saw his moment. August 6, 1916. The Sixth Battle of the Isonzo, the most famous and the most successful of all. Italian sappers dug tunnels beneath Mount Sabatino, slipping behind Austrian defenses. Artillery pounded the town of Gorizia. And for once, the Italians had the high ground. Austrian reinforcements were denied by Vienna. Boroevich was left without fresh troops. In less than an hour, Mount Sabatino fell. Gorizia, long a symbol of Austrian defiance, collapsed under the pressure. Cadorna ordered the capture of the southern road leading into town, cementing Italy's control. It was a triumph, but it came at a staggering price. Over 51,000 Italian casualties in just 11 days. And even now, after all this, the front barely budged. Victory was ephemeral. The land was shattered, the soldiers exhausted. And the enemy, still not broken. But in Cadorna's mind, the strategy was working. Attrition, no matter the cost, would wear the Austrians down. September, the 7th battle. October, the 8th. November, the 9th. Each time, the same goal to break through the Kars Plateau and reach the Slovene interior. Each time, the same result: a few kilometers of shattered rock and thousands of new graves. By late 1916, the Austrians, bloodied but holding, sent word to Berlin. They needed help. As winter gripped the front in late 1916, the bloodbath of the Isonzo briefly froze. But beneath the snow, pressure mounted. The Austrians had repelled 9 major offensives, but their defenses were cracking. Their reserves had thinned. Entire regiments were skeletons. Ammunition was scarce. Morale among the Slovene and Hungarian conscripts plummeted. In desperation, Austria-Hungary requested direct military assistance from Germany. Berlin agreed. Meanwhile, Cadorna, unrepentant, unmoved, prepared for another push. His rationale was simple, almost hypnotic in its repetition. More pressure would break the enemy. No matter how many died, victory lay just one assault away. In May 1917, the 10th Battle of the Isonzo began. The Italians struck with unprecedented firepower. Over 2 days of artillery bombardment across the Austrian lines. Their targets included Trieste, a strategic port, and Monte San Gabriele, a fortified mountain that anchored the Austrian defense. For 15 days, the Italians surged. They advanced within 23 kilometers of Trieste. Mount San Gabriele shook under constant shelling. The Austrians bent, but did not break. On June 3rd, they counterattacked hard. Italian gains melted. Trenches were retaken. The Italian offensive stalled. The price? 150,000 Italian casualties. The Austrians lost 90,000. No. Something began to shift. In the ranks, Italian soldiers questioned not just the orders, but the war itself. There were refusals. Small mutinies. Men laid down their rifles. Not from cowardice, but from futility. They had seen too much, lost too many, and believed in nothing. Yet Cadorna, ever detached, launched another offensive. August 18th, the 11th battle. It was the largest, yet an artillery storm of over 5.5 million shells. The objective: seize the Bansica Plateau. If successful, it would split the Austrian front and isolate their remaining strongholds. The Italians succeeded. They captured the plateau, but once again failed to take the fortified peaks that anchored Austrian defenses. Mount San Gabriele still stood. So did Monte Hermata. And in seizing Bansica, Italy's Second Army had overextended, split by the river, vulnerable to counterattack. And then came the turning point. Germany arrived. With Austrian lines stretched thin, German divisions, elite, hardened, well-equipped, were deployed to the Isonzo front. Their task: deliver a decisive blow. On October 24th, 1917, they struck. What followed was Caporetto the 12th and final battle of the Isonzo. But this time, the Italians were not the aggressors. In a cruel reversal, it was Germany and Austria-Hungary who launched the offensive. At dawn, poison gas swept the Italian trenches. Men clawed at their masks. Hundreds choked in silence. Then came the mines detonated beneath key positions. Then the stormtroopers, fast, coordinated, relentless. Italian lines folded. Commanders panicked. Whole units fled without firing a shot. The Second Army split across the river collapsed. Cadorna, true to form, refused withdrawal, ordered his men to stand. But reality crushed theory. After 6 days, he relented. A general retreat was ordered. What followed was chaos. The Italian army fell back across the Tagliamento River. Then the Piave. Supply lines shattered. Horses dropped dead in their harnesses. Artillery was abandoned in muddy fields. Soldiers, hollow-eyed and limping, streamed westward. Behind them, Austrian and German troops pushed forward until they, too, broke. Their advance had been too successful. They outpaced their supplies. Their men were exhausted. Trieste was still far, and now the Italians dug in again, this time on their own soil. Caporetto had shattered Italy. 300,000 casualties. Entire divisions surrendered. Morale was gone. The army broken. And Cadorna? Finished. His brutalist leadership, his obsession with obedience, his executions for dissent, his refusal to adapt had finally caught up to him. One of his most infamous acts had been the decimation of mutinous troops, an ancient Roman punishment where 1 in every 10 was executed by their peers. It was meant to instill discipline, but only deepened resentment. After Caporetto, the political cost could no longer be ignored. Cadorna was dismissed in disgrace. His career ended, not with glory, but with infamy. In the end, the battles of the Isonzo achieved nothing and cost everything. 12 offensives, over 2 million casualties, dead, wounded, missing. The river ran red. The mountains echoed with the moans of the dying. Italy did not collapse, but it came close. Austria-Hungary held its frontier, but at the cost of its reserves, its morale, and its last illusions of military superiority. The Slovene territories where much of the fighting occurred were devastated. Over 30,000 Slovene civilians died. Tens of thousands more were deported, interned, or starved. To this day, the Isonzo front, modern-day Socha in Slovenia, remains scarred by bunkers, cemeteries, and broken stones. And the great irony? The war would not be decided in the Alps or on the Isonzo. It would end in the streets of Berlin, in the hunger of Vienna, in the collapse of empires, not in the conquest of mountains. So what was it all for? For Cadorna, perhaps it was ego. For Italy, perhaps it was dreams of empire. For history, it remains a warning that persistence, without reflection, is not courage. It is madness. The Isonzo stands not as a symbol of heroism, but of blind sacrifice. 12 battles, 1 river, and still no lesson fully learned. Today, the Socha River flows quietly through the Slovenian Alps. Its turquoise waters shimmer beneath tourist bridges. The mountains above, once carved by artillery, are now marked by hiking trails and plaques. But listen closely, and you might still hear them. The cries of men scaling impossible cliffs, the whistle of shells that never stopped falling, the silence of command, and the silence of surrender. The Battle of the Isonzo is rarely remembered outside Italy and Slovenia. It lacks the fame of Verdun, the horror of the Somme, the revolution of Ypres. But in many ways, it is more haunting. Because here, the tragedy was avoidable. The terrain was known, the odds were clear, the mistakes were repeated, and yet, the bodies kept piling. Over 2 million casualties across a single static front, 12 offensives in 29 months, dozens of towns obliterated, hundreds of thousands never recovered. Luigi Cadorna never stood trial. He never faced justice. He lived to write his memoirs, defending his choices, blaming others. History, as always, did not shout, it whispered. Italy would go on to win some measure of reward in the post-war treaties. But it came with a poisoned legacy, embittered soldiers, political instability, and the seeds of fascism. Some of those who survived the Isonzo would later wear black shirts. Some would march with Mussolini. The scars of this campaign were not just physical, they were ideological, spiritual. The High Command's disregard for life would leave a mark, one that echoed in later decades through other wars, other disasters, and other decisions made by men who never set foot in the trenches. And so we return to the river, to the water that once ran red, to the ghosts who still wander the stone paths of the karst, whispering a question no commander has ever answered. Why? Why were we sent? Why did we climb? Why did we die? For nothing. Somewhere beneath those mountain peaks, the answer lies buried. Perhaps we will find it. Or perhaps, like the bones of the forgotten, it is meant to remain lost forever.